All right. In this video demonstration, we're going to look at how to assemble those still image previews or still image renders of your model into a single image inside of Photoshop. We're also going to look at adding text, a text layer over each one to indicate which view is which, and assemble it together and save a separate final JPEG file that we can use to print of our final work. All right. So with this step, now that we've created all of those component parts, we're going to go into Photoshop to assemble them all together. So I'm just going to minimize Blender for the time being. And I'm going to go hop into Photoshop. And this final image that we're creating, again, is kind of it's a typical format for previewing a 3D model professionally. Is looking at it and seeing it from three or four separate viewports. It's also the same file that we're going to generate for this 4-angle view. We will import into the final augment program for using as a tracking image to pull up your 3D model from. So we'll use it to generate a 3D tracker for that. And we'll talk about that later more specifically. But let's go ahead and get it set up to where we can put it together now. So now that we have Photoshop open, we're going to start a new file in here. So I'm just going to go to File, New from the top menu. And you want to go ahead and label this correctly because this will also be a file that you turn in when you're done with it. So you can call it 4-angle view. Is fine so long as it's clearly labeled. And we're going to create a canvas that is the same as like a print area. So I'm just going to make an 8.5 by 11. Again, this is dependent on those images that you rendered from Blender. If you created vertical images from Blender, like vertical renders, then you need to have a vertical canvas in Photoshop. So please make sure that you put in your dimensions correctly to accommodate that feature of your render images. So my render images were all horizontal, so I need my printout of my Photoshop image to be horizontal. So I need a long width, which will be my 11-inch width, and then my height should be 8.5 inches, 8.5. The resolution, you can make it 300 or you can use 200 or 250, whichever is fine. As far as rendering it out of Photoshop. I'm going to set it to 250 on mine, and I'm going to hit OK to open it up. All right, so now that I've got my Photoshop file active on screen, I'm going to do a couple things to set this up correctly. First, I'm going to set up rulers to turn on. So I'm going to go up to View from the top menu. And I'm going to slide down to Rulers from the list and turn those on. And then the next thing we're going to do after we turn on rulers is we're going to pull some guides out onto screen to mark off a equal 4 grid marked off section of our canvas. So I'm going to pull down first a vertical ruler. So just click and drag on your ruler at the top and pull down your first grid, and you want to line it up with the grid over here on the left to be exactly at center for the measurement. So center, it actually locks onto. If you just start moving it down towards just past the 4, it will automatically snap to the center line. So I'm just going to drag it down, and center of 8.5 inches is 4.25 inches, or 4 1/4. So I'm going to drop it right there, and then I'm going to go to my vertical ruler on the left and click and drag out a vertical line. And I'm going to pull that over until it latches on at about 5.5 inches, which is exactly half of 11. So when I drag it over, it actually snaps to an invisible grid by default in Photoshop. And I can lose that right there and let it go. All right. So now we've defined where each grid section of where each image is going to fit into our composition. So we know exactly where they're going to go. Again, if you're working vertically, this might look a little, yours will be turned the other direction, and that's okay. All right, now what we're going to do is import our images. So we're going to go up to File, and I'm going to go down to Place Embedded. Again, I want to make sure that my images are permanently added to my document. So I'm going to go to Place Embedded, and I'm going to locate where each of my still image renders were put. And I'm going to bring them in one by one. I think that in here, yeah, we can only grab one image at a time. So I'm just going to grab this one right here, just start with the top one and place it. Make sure there's nothing funky with options. Okay, good. So place. And what I'm going to do after I hit place is that it drops the image in to fit the entire grid. This is not what we need, though. What we need is for this image to fit inside of its own little grid square that we marked off. So I'm going to put this one. I'm going to hold down Shift and grab one of the corners of the image on screen. And I'm going to resize it to fit inside of one of these grid windows. So I'm going to drag it up till it fits in a window, and then release my mouse and then my Shift key. And hit Return to place the item so that it drops it. So that's my first view. I'm going to go back and I'll do the same process again, Place Embedded, and I'm going to do it with every single view that I have. And again, I'm just going to shrink each one to fit into a respective window. Again, holding down Shift and grabbing a corner and dragging it in. You do not need to squish and skew your images. And I'll continue to do this again until I get all of my images placed in my scene. And again, you want each one placed in a different grid square. Until you got them all kind of positioned in like this. And again, as far as my positioning of the images are concerned, this is, again, I got them all to fit in without putting like extra little border separations between each image. You don't need to have that when working with character viewports like this. But now that we have them in, we're going to add a couple text layers into our document so that we can label each one of these scenes. So to activate your text tool inside of Photoshop, your text tool is the type tool over on your toolbar on the left, capital T. So I'm going to click on the T, and I'm going to go through and just label each of these. Now, again, I'm going to type in a box here for my first detail view. So I'm just going to find a place that I can type the text over that I can make it visible. So I'll put it right here over the body, and I'm going to put in the word detail. Now it may come out looking kind of funky initially, or you may not be able to read it well. So we may have to tweak some of the text settings inside of Photoshop so that we can see it. So I'm going to re-highlight my word and use my text options at the top of Photoshop to change the appearance of my text. So I'm going to try out using just bright white text at the moment. And I'm going to up the scale of the text as well from like 12 to something that's a lot more visible in terms of working with your images. And again, when you're doing this, always zoom back out to view your work and see what it looks like. Is the word actually visible over your model currently? Or does it need to be adjusted? Do you need to change the typeface, for instance? A thicker typeface will probably will actually be more visible over the top of your model. So you may want to switch from like whatever it's set to, Myriad Pro Regular, and maybe use like a bold typeface instead. Might be a recommendation I have. So they've got options here like Myriad Bold. So I'm going to try that. There we go. So that's a little bit of a thicker typeface, easier to read now over my model. Again, your letters may need to be white if your model is predominantly dark. They may need to be black if your model is predominantly bright. But you need to pick out, or maybe they need to be gray to be in between to stand out. But once you've created one, exit the type tool by switching to like your move tool, and then go to your type tool again, and then go to each of your other boxes to create your other view labels. So this one I'll put right side, and then I'll come down here and type in left side, exit the tool, come back to it, and I'll do this one for front. And they don't have to sit on top of your model if you don't want them to. It can be off to the side of the model if you have space on screen to do that. So I'm just going to move each of these other ones over to the side a little bit so that I can see my model without it being obscured by the text. All right. So you get your text placed on each one, again repositioning it if you need to, adjusting the typeface if you need to, and coloring. And then once we're done with this step, then we can save this image to File. So now I'm going to go to File, Save As, and from here I'm going to change my format option. From PSD, I'm going to switch it to JPEG. You're welcome to save a PSD for your own files if you need it. If you need to revisit the design of your angle view for any reason, but that's not a file that I require you to turn in. You just need to turn in the JPEG version to me. But I'll save my JPEG 4-angle view into my output folder, and then hit save down below. And when you get the pop-up for JPEG options, make sure that the little quality slider is set to large file, and then hit OK. And just to make sure that it created it, I always go back and recheck my work. So I'm going to go to my folder, check my outputs, and look for my 4-angle view, and pull it up, and make sure that it is clear, it is not rendered poorly, and I can read everything. And if all of those check out, then you've got a good character 4-angle view to use. All right. And that's all you need to do to work in the Photoshop component for the final submission. So I'm going to go ahead and close out Photoshop, and we'll stop this particular video at this stage. And, and when we get back together in the next video, we're going to look at how to get your model exported out of Blender properly, and getting it prepared for uploading into Augment.